an enormous franchise with 9 mainline games, numerous spin-offs, and a massive fan base dedicated to the lore. It was only a matter of time before we got an on-screen appearance. So with that, let's talk Five Nights at Freddy's.
No, I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum!
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to Easily Entertained. Like I said, we are talking Five Nights at Freddy's. The movie finally came out, and so it's kind of exciting that we can get to talk about it now. I am not hugely into the FNAF lore as much as some other people are. I would really like to play all the games and actually experience all of it, and maybe I'll dive really deep into it and actually understand more of the actual movie itself. But from a baseline standpoint, where I've played the first 3 games, I believe, and like seen lore and the other games here and there, so my standpoint of the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is very base level. It's not very dedicated. I mainly saw it and I was like, ooh, this is fun. I played the original games when they were first out, just because, you know, that was the talk of the town when when Five Nights at Freddy's was out. And so kind of just wanted to see it and see how it fares up. So I'm kind of going into it with less of the lore standpoint in mind. Like, I know some of the base things, but nothing too in depth. Like, most of the stuff I know is just because I thought it was kind of funny, like how it's basically canonically located in like Hurricane, Utah. Sorry for anyone from there. You know, I just pronounced it wrong the first time. But yeah. And so what I kind of like about it is, so before we really like dive into the story aspects of everything, is its practicality. It was so cool to watch and have like the suits of all the characters. They actually look like suits, and it's because they're practical. I think there's only a couple shots where I would guess it was probably CGI, and I would say that's mainly when like the characters are like jumping and kind of freaking out at you. But for the most part, it does seem like they were all practical. And like looking it up, they hired the Jim Henson puppetry company to actually make the suits and everything, so they're almost like mascot suits. But I found that super interesting that they did that, because it's not very commonplace for that to be in a movie nowadays. Typically, movies try to go the cheaper route and do just CGI everything, but it kind of loses its sense of charm and its sense of realism, really. And so that aspect, I don't always care for CGI. Sometimes I like it because you can get some really realistic things, and that's if you put a lot of time and money and effort into it, and you can have some really good CGI in a film. You think the Avatar movies, some of the Jurassic Parks or Jurassic Worlds, they can look super realistic, and you almost forget that CGI is a thing, and you actually think, oh, they got these things for real, and it actually makes you believe that something exists. But that's not always the case, and in those kind of cases, practicality is better. If you have practicals, you can actually have the actors interact with them. They look like they're actually in the setting because they are. And so those kind of aspects are hard to replicate in CGI. And so seeing it in a modern movie is very interesting. Like, it used to be the case a lot because computer animation wasn't always around. And so practicality was the big thing. So you have movies like The Thing, Alien, Predator, where you have these real physical suits and effects that let you really connect with what's on screen because it feels like it's actually there. And so having a modern movie like that that doesn't rely on the crutch of CGI is awesome. And I kind of love that they went that route. Critics seem to not care for this movie as much as I do, but I did not take it as seriously. I find that this movie falls under the Spider-Man 3 effect, where you shouldn't take it too seriously. And granted, people are not going to know that. I do think that can be kind of lackluster, is if your general audience doesn't know that it's not to be taken seriously, they will take it seriously, and thus more people don't really like it. And Five Nights at Freddy's kind of falls under that. Critically, yeah, some of the writing especially is pretty lackluster. It's very base level. You don't really dive too much into the characters, which makes sense. It's only one movie, and it feels like they weren't trying to franchise this movie. They kind of jumbled a lot of things into it. And so with that, they can't flesh out things as well as the games could, because, like, as I said, there's 9 mainline games. So stretching that out is kind of hard to really condense into an hour and a half. So I can understand why critically they didn't really care for that. But at the same time, if you're not taking it very seriously, it doesn't really matter, because you're kind of just going in to have a good time. But it is kind of cheesy. Some of the story beats just don't hit as much as you really think there are. Like, there's some like good like acting choices and stuff like that, but for the most part, the writing is where it is kind of lackluster. But I tend to get over that if, like, there are other aspects of the movie that I find kind of interesting. But I can understand from a critical standpoint why that makes it so low, because if you're watching it and you're not super into the games and you don't really know anything about Five Nights at Freddy's, you will go into it with a more critical mindset, because you're going to treat it like other movies. But because it's a video game movie, I don't think they should really be treated the same way that mainline movies do. Think Super Mario Bros., Sonic. You are not going to compare them to movies like Oppenheimer, Ford versus Ferrari, Hacksaw Ridge, where they have really good writing and like super good character development. And yes, those things are good, and we should still have those in video game movies, but it doesn't make or break the movie, because typically video game movies already have an established fan base, and you're more targeting the fan base rather than just trying to create a really good, more original story, even though all the movies I just described are all historical events. So it's kind of hard to do that because you're just taking from real life. But movies like, so say like The Notebook or A Quiet Place, where these are fictional events, but they have really good writing and story beats and character development, they aren't established. And so that's the point of the movie, is to establish these things, and that's why you have those good characters and good writing. And video games, you're more just relying on that audience. People are going to be more excited that instead of the Night Guard having really good character development, they see Springtrap on screen. And so that's why I think Five Nights at Freddy shouldn't be treated as critically as it has been. I do understand it, and it would be even better if those aspects were in it, because then it makes it not just a movie for people who really like Five Nights at Freddy's, but a movie for anybody. It makes it just a movie. And I think that's like where I'm kind of conflicted is, yes, it should be a movie because that's what it is, but it's also a video game adapted into a movie. And with that, there are a lot of complications, and sometimes it's just the format. Sometimes not everything is made for different formats. Movies like Jurassic Park, I feel like, do good both in the book and the movie. They're definitely different stories, but they do good as both. A different kind of story, I think, is How to Train Your Dragon. The How to Train Your Dragon movie, fantastic. The How to Train Your Dragon books, fantastic. But they are vastly different from each other. And both those kind of stories work in their mediums. The movie version of How to Train Your Dragon probably wouldn't work as good as a book. The book version of How to Train Your Dragon would flop as a movie franchise because it's not the same story. And sometimes, even with video games, I think that's the case because video games are primarily focusing on gameplay. What does it feel like to play the game? And it's super hard to capture that in a movie format. I feel like Super Mario Bros. Did it really well because they hit both the nostalgia and kind of the wonder of wandering around this world and you discovering things with the characters. So that I felt like combined things really well. But a movie like Sonic the Hedgehog, you don't really feel like you're playing the game. It's not the same experience as you would get playing the game. It's still adapted well, but it's that gameplay element that makes video games so appealing. And with that, kind of comes a lot with the lore, and the franchise is obviously massive, and people are very dedicated to the internal story. And with that, having a movie like this that kind of combines a lot of elements can make it a bit more sloppy from a critical standpoint as well. So like I said at the beginning, I haven't played all the Five Nights at Freddy's games, so I don't know all the little bits of lore that I was missing, but I knew like a base amount and like enough to understand everything. So like from what I know, and like the 3 games that I've played, like Springtrap isn't actually a person in a costume. It's not like a Scooby-Doo moment, but I understand why they did it because, like as I was saying, having this adaptation, the ghost controlling the animatronics, I don't think is going to get to everybody because in the games it's very well established and people understand, and it's like all these paranormal things are what's kind of controlling the animatronics, whereas in a movie standpoint, people need to kind of understand why they're controlling the animatronics. And so this movie making Springtrap an actual person instead of just a suit possessed by a person kind of makes it more understandable why the ghost kids are controlling the animatronics, because he's the one who abducted them. At least that's what I was getting out of it. But with that, like, that's obviously not the same, I don't think, the same way that it is in the games. And that could kind of rub people the wrong way because they had people like Matt Pat, who was featured in the movie, and what I was guessing, I didn't look at the actual credits for this, is that he was most likely a consultant on the film since he knows so much of the FNAF lore. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. But again, it comes down to that adaptability. Being able to move a video game to a movie is a vast task. It's not always going to be well done. You're going to have to change some things. And personally, I feel like what they changed and what seems kind of normal fits for this movie. And it still is very like supportive and like correct to the source material for the most part. And then it takes some creative liberties, which I think is the best way to go around adaptations, is because every story is different. Why wouldn't I just play the game and not watch the movie? Like, I understand why you have different stories, why you have different elements, and you don't want to repeat the same story over and over again. It's a franchise. Even all the games, although like mechanics are fairly similar, the game story changes because it makes it more interesting. And to bring it over to a movie, you have to keep it interesting because it's a different kind of audience. You have an audience that instead of playing it or watching somebody play it, they are watching the story completely. And so you have to make it engaging for your audience. And I think the way they did it kind of was pretty good. And they follow more of an in-depth story of the Night Guard instead of just clocking in, watching the animatronics, and then dipping, which is how you would do it. You have to have a human element of your story. That's the best way for you to connect with the movie, is by having characters. And although, maybe some people really relate to Freddy or really relate to Bonnie or whatever, that's not everybody. And it's very unlikely to be most people. And so having an actual person and people that you can relate to, so like having a child or things like that, that helps you connect with the movie, and it makes you care more about the events that are going on. And with kind of similar realm, the rating is, I think, what kind of bugged a lot of people, is because Five Nights at Freddy's is typically not known for its gore, but it's definitely a horror game. And sometimes horror movies just do better with an R rating. But the way they got around things, like using shadows, or the way the game kind of gets around things, that instead of showing on-screen deaths, you make it more implied. You use like a shadow to kill someone. You just have the character jumping out at them, and you're like, oh, they're for sure dead. Like, you don't have to have it on screen to imply it. And because the games are very often played by YouTubers, and that's kind of where a massive bit of the fan base is, they're trying to target a younger audience more in their teens. And so that means they have to make it a PG-13 rating. PG and PG-13 are the most profitable movies because so many people can see them. PG is number one. I believe PG-13 is right below, because so many people can watch those movies. And that's why PG-13, like horror and things, they try to stretch the bounds of those ratings because they want to target as big an audience as possible. Horror is a genre that's already very closed off because things are very taboo. You're watching people get killed. It's kind of a ridiculed genre because although it can be fun for the people who really like it, I know a lot of people that love horror films. For those that really don't like it, they're very vocal about not liking it. And it's because of typically the more R-rated stuff like gore and like sex and things like that. And so having the PG-13 rating and kind of dialing things down and focusing more on a younger audience lets studios actually broaden out and get more awareness. Maybe they make a sequel and maybe they could be R for the sequel. That has happened for movies before. But to have the most profitable franchise and have it be accessible to the most people, especially to an audience that is most wanting to see it. Like having teenagers who play FNAF games or watch a lot of the lore, you want to hit that audience. If you're not hitting it, you're only getting people who are above 18, or they have to go with their parents, and parents aren't always going to want to go see those kind of movies. And so if you bring the rating down, it lets more people that are actually fans of this franchise actually go and see it. But yeah, these are just my takes, of course. And granted, I'm a very base level Five Nights at Freddy's fan. I know, fake fan. I didn't know every aspect of the lore. I'm sorry. But it is what it is. And, you know, I'm just one guy giving his opinion. It's not a theory. Okay? I'm not Matt Pat. But to kind of end off this episode and to get everyone involved in our FNAF discussion, I want to know, with the question of the week, what is your favorite Five Nights at Freddy's game? Because there are quite a few of them. So I imagine it's very accurate to assume that there's a favorite. You have to have one that maybe you've played more, you like more of the story behind it. I don't know. What's your favorite Five Nights at Freddy's game? For me, and obviously this is kind of biased because I've only played a couple of them, I personally would go with the original. I think classic Five Nights at Freddy's, where you just have 5 nights, you don't have all the side characters, You have some, and it's a lot more intrigue and mystery, and you're not entirely sure what's going on because nothing has really been explained yet. I think that's why I really like the original Five Nights at Freddy's game. But I can understand reasonings for all of them. So I want to know, what is your Five Nights at Freddy's game? And maybe give me the reason why, because I'm kind of curious. I don't know all about the lore, and so maybe you could tell me a little bit about it. Get me educated, okay? I'm gonna try and get the games. I know I saw a bundle for the Switch that had like five Nights at Freddy's games, and I want to get it because it was like $20, and then I can play them all. And obviously not all of them, but understand a lot more of the lore that's going on. But yeah, it's a good time. So let us know what your favorite Five Nights at Freddy's game is, and that does it for this episode. So we will see you next time. If you want to check out more of our stuff, visit our Instagram at Easily Entertained Podcast. We have things like Music Monday and entertainment news on Thursday for the radio station that I help out with. And so it's a pretty good time. But until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.